U.S. President Donald Trump's controversial policies, the ongoing crisis in Yemen, terror at a mosque in Canada, and President Xi Jinping unveils China's global vision. Big stories, and we'll tackle them all. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. On most days, we go in depth on a single story, but once a month, we like to take a step back from our usual format and spend a bit of time gathering fresh insight and analysis from those covering world events. To help us dive into these issues, we've put together a distinguished panel of journalists. Haroon Siddiqui is the Toronto Star's editorial page editor emeritus. Ching-Yi Chang is the White House correspondent and chief editor for the Shanghai Media Group's U.S. News Center. Afshin Molavi is the editor of the New Silk Road Monitor and a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And CGTN's Nathan King is back with us after spending a month in China, or 2 months in China, reporting from there. We'll have more on that later, but let's get straight into the news. Nathan, let me start with you. The big news, Iran. Iran carried out a ballistic missile test. The United States responded, or at least the National Security Advisor responded by saying that Iran would be put on notice. Let's watch.
Recent Iranian actions involving a provocative ballistic missile launch and an attack against a Saudi naval vessel conducted by Iran-supported Houthi militants underscore what should have been clear to the international community all along about Iran's destabilizing behavior across the entire Middle East. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
Tough words out of the White House there. And the United States has now acted on that warning, on that threat. 12 entities, 13 individuals are going to be sanctioned. The U.S. is imposing new sanctions on Iran.
That's right, through the Treasury, although they've been calibrated so that they doesn't look like it actually violates the spirit, at least, of the nuclear agreement, which, of course, Donald Trump has also rejected, but other world powers have been embracing. And I think this sort of goes to the point of this new president. Is his foreign policy going to be rhetoric and fairly calibrated, or is this just throw everything out and start all over again? So I think this is going to be a very interesting test case, if you like. Is this going to be small, calibrated sanctions like we saw under the Obama administration, like we saw under George W. Bush, or is it the beginning of something different? Tough rhetoric, but we have seen a lot of tough rhetoric all week, haven't we? Not just against potential adversaries like Iran, but also Australia, when Donald Trump learned about the refugee deal. So as we look at all these rhetoric, we have to think, what are the policies going to be, especially when it comes to as yet uncharted waters, for example, against China. But one other thing I just want to throw out there at the beginning of the show is, one thing I've been asking myself about is, when you hear the rhetoric and the policies, is any of what they're doing in the American national interest? Because I'm having a hard time understanding it.
Okay, Afshin, very quickly, what's your take on this development? And I have another question on something else that Donald Trump did this week.
Sure. You know, I think what's very interesting about this development is Donald Trump spent a lot of time on the campaign trail criticizing George W. Bush for the Iraq War. And you know, if he continues down this path, he may find himself in a situation where the nuclear deal falls apart, the centrifuges begin spinning again, and he either becomes the president that allows Iran to go nuclear on his watch, or he becomes the president that may have to engage in military action with Iran, which is something that he was very highly critical of. So this is a first step, but it's something that could lead to, you know, eventually the breakup of the nuclear deal.
So the danger is that it could be a slow march to a war?
Can I just add something? I think this is really important. Consequences of the policies. It seems to me that sometimes the rhetoric hasn't been backed up with what will happen if we say this, what will happen if we do this, and that's a very dangerous position to be in.
Okay, actually, I'm going to move on to something else now. President Trump introduced and implemented that travel ban. We saw it last weekend. Chaos, not just in the United States, but across the globe. He says this ban is meant to keep America safe. It's part of the war on terrorism. Will that do it? Or, as some commentators are saying, this actually sets the United States back. It's going to be more dangerous for the United States. States?
You know, it certainly does set the United States back. It sets the United States back as a nation of immigrants as well. It's important to remember, you know, who we are as Americans. But also, you know, not only is the policy, in my view, wrong, you know, isolating these particular 7 countries, all of which, you know, the Cato Institute did a study of the terrorist attacks that were committed on American soil, and of those 7 countries between 1995 and 2013 or so, the total number of terrorist attacks committed by citizens of those countries was 0. You know, but not only, you know, it was that odd, but it was just rolled out so badly as well. I mean, people were flying in, immigration authorities didn't even know what the rules were, green card holders were being detained, and now they're saying, no, green card holders are not going to be, you know, detained, that they have a waiver. So, you know, this is the new normal, Anand. This is the chaos that we're living in the new Trump administration.
Certainly a lot being happening. Ching-Yi Chang, one other big development is we have the Defense Secretary who is traveling in Southeast Asia right now. James Mattis, the general, is traveling to South Korea and to Japan. He issued a warning in South Korea that if the Democratic People's Republic of Korea uses any kind of nuclear weapons, there would be an overwhelming response from the United States. He also told Japan that the alliance between the United States and Japan is rock solid. He also expressed support for the deployment of the THAAD missile system in South Korea. How is all this being seen in China?
Regarding the THAAD system, it's although the United States saying that it's only aimed at the North Korea, but it will not do good to the region because it will cause instability in the region because it's become a kind of armed races. So, but that's the only thing that I believe in the Donald Trump's worldview is that he believed that the world is chaotic and he wanna put on the arm race. So that will definitely make the world more unstable forthcoming.
Okay, let's bring in Haroon Siddiqui from Canada. Haroon, President Trump has been conducting some diplomacy over the telephone with a number of world leaders. He called it tough phone calls with world leaders. Here's some of what he had to say.
Not exactly diplomacy, yes.
When you hear about the tough phone calls I'm having, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. They're tough. We have to be tough. It's time we're going to be a little tough, folks. We're taken advantage of by every nation in the world virtually. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen anymore.
Is every country taking advantage of the United States? And the president here seems to have upset some of this country's closest allies.
No, you see, as Nathan said right at the top of the show, what we really need to understand and figure out, and we can't at this point, is he talking to the world or is he talking to his constituency, having made these bold, extraordinary, stupid promises, and he has to be seen to be delivering, and that's what they seem to be doing for the last 2 weeks or so. Whether they have thought through as to the implications of that remains to be seen. So the next few days will tell us whether some adults are going to be in charge of the White House or not. You know, I mean, yapping away, talking, saying stupid things served him very well on the campaign trail. Will it serve him well? I mean, I've covered Iran for many years. I know, for example, dealing with Iranians is not the same thing as dealing with either North Korea or, on the other side, with the Arabs who are in debt to the United States. Arabs may play a rollover for Mr. Trump to please him. Iranians are very tough people. They're tough as nails. They're not going to do it.
Ching-Yi Chang, I want to ask you about something else that came out of the Trump administration, and that is the president's closest advisor, Steve Bannon, warning that he believes that the United States and China will be at war in the next few years. What kind of response has there been out of Beijing on that?
So far, we see a lot of rhetoric from the Trump administration, and we heard long ago, even during his campaign trail, he kept bashing China all the time. So, but that kind of war definitely caused confusion in China and around the world, and definitely, I think the great majority of the people in the world they don't want to see a war between these two big power that would be devastating to the world. So Chinese people are cautiously watching, and they know there are a lot of rhetoric and a lot of confusion over there.
But words have consequences when you're president they don't have on the campaign trail.
Right.
And I think most Chinese policymakers are now looking at an entirely different rationale when they're dealing with Donald Trump.
Okay, Afshin, let's move on to our next topic, Yemen. We had this United States attack in Yemen. Details were very murky at the beginning. Now we seem to be getting more details on what happened there. And one of the things that we're hearing this via the Reuters news agency, and it quotes medics as saying that in that raid, in which a U.S. service member was killed, several others injured, up to 30 Yemeni civilians were killed, including 10 women and children. This was the first raid authorized by the Trump administration. And I think it's safe to say that this was a raid that was actually planned during the Obama administration, but he gave the green light for the raid to go ahead. Seems like a botched raid.
It does, doesn't it? Tragic, you know, with the number of civilians dead. I mean, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen is a serious threat. And in fact, they have tried to strike on U.S. soil in the past, and they will continue to try to strike on U.S. soil. I think it is interesting that Al-Qaeda in Yemen was the first target. You know, President Trump has often talked about ISIS. He's apparently tasked the Defense Secretary Mattis to create an ISIS plan over the next 30 days. But it certainly does look like a botched effort. But there was also some geopolitics at play here. Right. This was not only just a strike at Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. It was also part of the larger play of you know, the Iran-Saudi Cold War that is taking place. It seems that the Trump administration is leaning towards Saudi Arabia in the Iran-Saudi Cold War, and taking an action in Yemen is part of that broader geopolitical play.
Haroon, let me just get your view on one other thing. You know, as Afshin pointed out here, are we seeing here, because if we look at this war, this is Saudi Arabia bombing Yemen using United States weapons. Are we seeing here a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran?
Exactly right. It's a proxy war. I mean, mind you, let's just concede that Saudi Arabia has always thought of Yemen as their backyard and have always said they need to control it, exactly the same way that Putin talks about his neighborhood and he needs to control it and so on. This is an authoritarian streak that we are witnessing. And what is the United States doing supporting this raid and this war that has been going on for 2 years? 10,000 people have been killed so far. Right. UNICEF says it's a crisis, humanitarian crisis that people are facing. A child is dying every 10 minutes or so, and the United States is backing all of this humanitarian disaster. And as I said earlier, the positive results of it are yet to be seen.
Right, Nathan, if you look at those figures that Haroon was citing there, 10,000 people killed, a child killed every 10 minutes, 3 million people displaced, and we also have, looking at some other figures, 400,000 children are suffering from malnutrition, 2.2 million are in need of medical care. How does this end?
Yeah, and you know, the Yemen...
And we don't hear a word about it.
Exactly. You know? I was just about to say, I totally agree that it's the forgotten war. Yeah. You know, so much focus obviously on Syria and Aleppo. Right. Yemen you don't hear a lot about. And that's almost by design, because the US really has tried not to see itself on either side here, even though it's essentially backing Saudi Arabia. It does not want to see itself on the side of Saudi Arabia in public, because, you know, it's a very deeply unpopular war in the region where Saudis, rightly or wrongly, have been seen as aggressors. And it's very bad PR for the US, especially if you believe that the Houthi rebels are actually supported by Iran. So actually, this raid, this bungled raid, actually focuses attention a little bit more on the US and the Saudi relationship and the weapons. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether this administration steps forward into Yemen or steps back.